Hey guys, welcome. It's on time, so we're not gonna start there. It looks like folks are still gonna arrive fashionably late, so we can hang out for a couple more minutes. But um, just imagine that there's nice lounge music playing while we're waiting. Um, Actually, you guys could help. Just double check me. Make sure that you can see the slides. Um, put those on. All right. Um, can you see those slides? Put it into slideshow view. There we go. Can you guys see those slides? You can type in chat or on the Q&A. Give me some, you'll be my AV team. Or not. Hey, Leslie, welcome back. Hmm. I have multiple cameras to let me make sure that I'm not making an idiot of myself. Um, all right. So it's, I guess, a small group tonight. We had I think 15 people sign up, register, but maybe the time is tough for everyone. But that's okay. People can watch on the YouTube channel. Can you guys all hear me? You can, yeah, whatever you can do. Give a thumbs up or signal in the chat room if you can. Or Q&A. Storm is coming. Yes, no kidding. It's going to be nuts. But the real funny part, actually, I have 4 kids. The funny part is the end of snow days. I mean, our kids will never have crazy peace and freedom for one day, you know, every winter, now that everybody's doing Zoom. All right, hope you guys are having a good night. This is, I think, is going to be a really exciting topic. And we're talking about tolerance. a portion of the talk was sort of prepared to avail people of a chance to talk about it and sort of share their experience. But I guess with very few of us, you guys are welcome to talk, or I can just kind of talk about tolerance from a soliloquy kind of perspective. All right, but can you guys chat? Does that feature work? Just in case you do want to participate. Great. Yes. All right. Let me see if we can broadcast these very simple slides. Okay. Are you able to see these slides? Now I have to see you because I can't even see the chat feature when this is going on. Okay, great. So I gather you can see me and the slides at the same time. Not that I'm the salient thing to watch, but just want to make sure that I'm not going to make funny faces while I'm doing the show. Okay, great. So cannabis tolerance, basically the goal was to overview what tolerance is, to talk about very briefly dependence and addiction and resistance, because these are terms that people often confuse. You know, we use them socially and colloquially pretty haphazardly, and that confuses everybody. So I'll talk a little bit about that stuff. If you guys have, the people that are attending, if you have questions or want to talk about, you know, specifics, this is the time to do it. I sort of, you know, put this out there for everybody to chat if they want. And then I'm going to talk about treating tolerance, which is probably what most people are after, just sort of the nitty gritty of what to do about it, which is actually a really chunky topic. There's a lot there. There's a lot of opportunity to not only understand tolerance, but impact it. And then sort of reviewing how this all happens and, you know, what it means clinically. And I'm happy to throw some examples out there of how people have succeeded. For those of you who don't know, I have an archive, a library of cannabis literature. I made a separate folder for tolerance for the papers that kind of go into this talk. There are plenty more on the drive, but this is just the selection I had time to go through. And that's at bit.ly/CED tolerance with the CED capitalized. That brings you right into the drive, and everything's free there. Okay. So overview of tolerance. Tolerance is basically a diminished response. You're taking the same thing and it's just not doing it for you. You know, for some people, what that means is they're taking a 5 milligram gummy and works hunky-dory for the first couple of weeks, and then it's not really giving you the bang that you wanted. You know, for whatever the reason, for whatever the medical sort of treatment, the steady dose is not doing the trick. Another way of sort of looking at the same thing is, okay, if the 5 isn't working, you start taking 6 or 8, and that's working, then you're increasing a dose, you're taking more product to achieve the same effect that you wanted to before. So this is the world of tolerance. It's actually a very human thing. It's a very adaptive, I would say it's required to be a functioning animal in this culture. You know, if anybody who's been in a shower has noticed that, you know, if you have a temperature that you like, inevitably after a short period of time, it's not the temperature, it's not good anymore. You have to crank it up. Or you're taking a bath, same thing. You have to kind of increase the temperature. If you are eating foods, you know, you might notice that over time want more salt on it, sort of bring out flavor that your body's kind of gotten used to. Or I guess having a lollipop, at the beginning it tastes delicious, and then by the end, not so appealing. Your body kind of gets used to that feeling and then starts to either ignore it or not achieve the same effect. These are distinct qualities. This tolerance sort of idea is very distinct from dependence. When the word dependence comes up, and actually I use this word kind of in a confused manner as well. Dependence really should be a topic, in order to distinguish these, should be a topic relating to withdrawal. When your body is dependent on something, you're going to feel it when it's not there. If you picture your brain as a set of locks and keys, once you fill up a bunch of locks, the locks sort of feel good about that connection. It's hard to use with inanimate objects, but if you take away one of those keys, your body feels that differently. All of the systems are not go. You're missing a piece. That's really what withdrawal is talking about. It's different than, it's sort of a much more focused, microscopic view of the situation, which is very different than the whole system view, which is, oh, this system is tolerant to that amount of cannabis. Addiction is the next step, sort of down the walk. Addiction, really, you have not only a dependence, so there's something about the focused biology which is itching for a chemical match, but you have repercussions of that. You have withdrawal symptoms. You might have dopamine reactions that make you sort of want to do something again. You have a kind of a whole system engagement, and in and of itself, being addicted to something is not necessarily a bad thing. We in our culture, we have sort of taken it one step further, which is to say, if someone's addicted to something, they have bad things going on. There are a lot of people who are perhaps addicted to glasses, or addicted to, or would we say dependent on that? I think these are words that are hard to use now because our culture is so intertwined them. But for the sake of clarity, I'm calling addiction really the systemic response to a dependence scenario. And then abuse is when you sort of have, I guess, when the cloud falls over addiction, when you have disability, you have dysfunction, when the dependence, addiction, when that's causing evil or pain. Leslie says chocolate. Yeah, some people are addicted to chocolate, and then without the chocolate, you're just jonesing, suffering miserably, as my children do with hot chocolate these days. The medical world has sort of tried to, as we always do, medicalize the language, and we use terms like substance use disorder to try to lump all of this stuff in one basket. There are negatives about this too. When we lump severe substance use disorder or a mild substance use disorder, that's not really saying anything different from this is a dependent situation or someone is addicted. But that's what medicine does well, just kind of, as we say, put lipstick on the pig. This whole mess, tolerance, dependence, addiction, all this sort of, what is it? I can't think of the word. The language that we use around here is inadequate. We use them very loosely. They can be defined differently in different cultures, different sort of ways of thinking about it. But the real problem, one of the big problems with the whole industry of cannabis is judgment and stigma. And this has really been, obviously slammed into the culture around cannabis, that this was made for degenerates, that cannabis is only used by people who can't do better for themselves, and all these, boringly terrible judgments. Maybe in time this will be cleaned up. Hopefully as cannabis becomes legal, we'll see that, but who knows? to visualize what we're talking about in terms of tolerance, this is something I took from the web, just on a Google search, so I can't unfortunately credit it appropriately. But the idea here, looking at the bottom, is to see the milligrams as someone gets more experienced, they require higher and higher doses. Hopefully that's a simple enough concept that we don't necessarily need the image, but you get the idea. This is not always true, actually. One of the things that I'll talk about in just a couple slides is there are features about an individual or a product or the individual's use of the product which vary the level of tolerance and the likelihood for tolerance. It's not just the person to blame or the biology to blame or the product to blame. It's really a black box that everybody's involved in together. Okay. Have to crank the computer, I guess. There we go. So yeah, how about that? Exactly what I was about to talk about. So when tolerance happens really is with prolonged use. And that is concise and sort of summarizes all three parts because it's individual, and the individual assumes someone's using something unique in a unique time frame with unique biology and physiology. So tolerance really ultimately depends on someone's own neurochemistry. What types of neurotransmitters are they born with? What types of receptors are they born with? So basic innate neurochemistry, which is built from genetics. Physiology gets into a little bit more action. When we're talking about sort of everything else here, someone who's eating healthfully or sleeping appropriately or hydrating adequately, their physiology, the way that their machinery works, is going to be optimal. That's very different from someone, for example, who's malnourished or not sleeping adequately. Their tolerance might be different, and obviously that calls to thinking forward to what might help tolerance. And sort of rounding out all of these different things that we'll talk about today is the optimal sort of scenario for how someone can be, I guess, cost savings, minimize tolerance. So I've mentioned all of these. Product strength, pretty self-explanatory. If we're talking about THC tolerance, the more THC that's in something, the more likely you're going to have tolerance to that, and perhaps sooner. The more CBD, the more potentially tolerant you are to CBD, although that's a little bit different because of the way that THC and CBD bind. But for the sake of today's discussion, that's any product which you consume, whether it's hot water or sugar or cannabis in various varieties, you can develop tolerance. The schedule of use is an interesting thing that highlights the time element of cannabis tolerance. Our locks and our keys, our receptors of cannabis, are a dynamic thing. You're not X person with Y tolerance. That it's not a stable thing. Depending on how stressed you are in life, how much sleep you're getting, what your basic neurochemistry is, all of these things vary over time. I'm getting dinged, and I don't know if it's because of something I'm missing. So pardon me for just a sec. Okay, no, just other work things. We live in the age of dings. I can't. And I don't have my train of thought, so this is not something I should be juggling. But anyway, the schedule, as I was saying. So schedule really, it varies on product strength, on the individual, and all of these other things that are happening. We'll cover that more later, so we're not missing anything by my. All right, this is an image of sort of zoomed in into receptors, and the little boxes are elements of THC. The triangles, sort of receptors, are CB1 receptors. Those are the receptors in your brain which bind THC. One of the ways that this system can adapt is either changes in the boxes or changes in the triangles. When the boxes are slamming against the triangles, when you're taking in a lot of THC, the body's response is overwhelming. So for example, if each of these triangles was screaming a signal back into the cell, every time they get hit with a THC, the THC hits, the triangle screams. Eventually, the loudness of this scream is so overwhelming that the cell just doesn't function properly. So the natural adaptation to that, and sort of built into to all biology, is desensitization. These receptor systems become less sensitive. One of the ways they do that is to sort of shut off the receptors. The internal, I guess you could think about it like a gosh, what's it called when the electric system in your house goes off, like a circuit breaker, and it sort of cuts the circuit. I don't know why I can't think of a fuse, like a broken fuse. The other way that this system adapts to all these screaming triangles is internalization. These receptors, literally, these proteins that bind to the THC are literally taken into the cell, destroyed, and okay, we don't need them anymore. If we're going to get this constant signal, you know what? We can't function. We just have to hush the signal by taking away these triangles. So this is sort of what's happening if you zoomed in on a brain. This is a pretty obvious point. Basically, everybody, depending on what their unique physiology is, has a dose that's optimal. You know, there's a dose which is too much. There's a dose that's too little. Part of the process of medical cannabis is learning what that optimal dose is for an individual. Although really one can hack a too low dose and too high dose nonetheless. So this is a little bit of an ideal scenario, but not really practical. This is a fun visualization, different kind of visualization from the squares and triangles. But if you look at this graph, so on the left, we have basically around the clock use. And what we're seeing here, the y-axis is CB1 receptor density. How many cannabis receptors are there? How many triangles are there? Round the clock use, at the beginning, you have lots of receptors. And as time goes on, you have fewer and fewer receptors. So the cell is kind of commanding these proteins to come inside and just keep quiet. And then on the right half of this graph, on the leftmost side, you have someone who's using occasionally. And what this is showing that occasionally, so at the beginning, this person isn't using that much. The receptors are way out there. They're ready to receive those squares. And then up, they receive them, and they go back down. And okay, maybe a couple days go by, you're not using, and then you use again, all the receptors are back, and they're ready to receive those signals. And that's kind of intermittent density of signaling. And then the daily use, you see same thing that we saw before on the left-hand side. And then frequent use, this is really pointing to most of these peaks are high. You have most of them are greater receptor density. That doesn't seem right, actually. That should be the opposite. So if someone's using frequently, I guess frequent is less than daily. So in this case. So it's in the middle ground. The receptors are still there, but they're coming and going much more frequently. So I guess frequent in this case means more often than occasional. Although that still doesn't make sense. So I apologize. I'm just sort of realizing that this graph doesn't make sense for their point they're trying to make. But maybe that's cannabis use when you're a researcher. This is a highlight of the systems of machinery that are beyond just the receptors. So I was making the point earlier that there's this signaling system, there's this communication system in the cell. What happens is when those squares are binding to the triangles then beget a signal to, say, a rectangle, and then the rectangle begets another signal to a trapezoid. And all of a sudden, this is how the system of cellular communication works. In this case, they're showing that it's related to excitation or inhibition of a nerve cell. But one of the things that was sort of a revelation to most people in medicine who didn't learn about cannabinoid medicine was this is part of the communication system in all of the human body, not just brain, not just muscles. Almost every cell in our body has some impact of the cannabinoid communication system. So this topic, tolerance, is really a very relevant thing, not just in general and not just when cannabis is becoming a normal part of society, but just an important piece of what it means to be human. So this topic, I think, will be much more popular as people consume much more, as they develop tolerance and need to find solutions. But it's just an innate part of everything that means to be an animal. All right. Before I keep going and give sort of the clues, the answers, I guess, to tolerance, wanted to open it up to questions if people have direct questions that I can respond to before I give all the answers. So why don't I end the show here, and we have some more people. Any questions for now? Either throw up on the Q&A or chat. If you raise your hand, I can also put you up to be able to talk, so you don't have to type out a long thing. All right. So don't everybody jump up at once. All right. So I'll take that and keep going. Let's share again. Okay, and move on. Okay, so first of all, it's relevant to talk about what happens as someone's trying to adjust to tolerance. It is sometimes ugly, sometimes it's easy, but most of the time it's not. Along with the pleasure of enjoying less cannabis to achieve the same effect, you have some downside, at least during the adjustment period. Emotional lability, mood lability, people get cranky. When you don't have your coffee, you get cranky. When you don't have your cannabis that your brain kind of is hungry for, you can get cranky. There's not permanent crankiness, it's just sort of adjustment. People get super fatigued. I've noticed this, that we sort of depend on these cycles, and it almost feels like with withdrawing from cannabis or as someone's working on a tolerance break, they get less get up and go. They're sort of lazier in spirit. These are observations, from patients and from what we're learning in the observational culture. Pain is something I've seen not frequently, but often enough that it is a real thing, and it is important. A lot of back pain, a lot of sort of my body just aches, whether it's headache or my internals are just not happy. When your brain is not getting the signals it's used to, it lets you know, because chances are you as a being, as a whole conscious being, should be aware of the microscopic things. It's just like getting a splinter. Your body sends a pain signal to your brain to say, okay, get rid of this. Something is not right. You can get an infection from that splinter. When your brain is not getting the signals that it has become used to, which presumably are good, because your brain sort of assumes that everything that you're doing day to day is right. You should be breathing, you should be eating, you should be sleeping. If taking your cannabis to feel normal, healthy, good is part of that normal, your brain's going to let you know when that's not happening. Cognitive impairment is an interesting and problematic description. Some of the impairment is because these signals, something is not right or happening, and you're actually distracted. It's not necessarily that the cannabis is like dumbing you down. That doesn't really make sense if you think about it. When you're withdrawing from cannabis, when you're taking cannabis away, your brain is adjusting, you feel crummy. You're not becoming less sharp. If cannabis were dulling you, you'd actually at that point you would be more sharp. Nonetheless, people feel like they're in a fog. They feel like they can't think of words. They can't, interact or socialize or communicate in usual ways. These brain farts that people describe. I think it's more a adjustment to the stress that one's experienced than anything cannabis happens to be causing. Appetite, this goes both ways. Some people feel really hungry. Some people feel like they've lost their appetite. And that ties in with the next example, which is sort of something going on with your gastric brain. Not a lot of people I guess, understand this. We know about it colloquially. You have a gut instinct, we say, or I'm feeling it in my gut, or this feels bad. People describe, but your GI tract actually has a really complex nervous system, just like your brain and spinal cord are a complex nervous system. And you're going to have compensation in ways in both accounts, both in your brain and in your GI tract, that respond to this sort of adjustment in tolerance or withdrawal. Some people get stomach aches, some people get loose stools, some people get blocked up, some people have reflux disease, some people feel nauseous, nauseated. Nobody knows why, nobody knows which one fits with which. We're still learning a lot here, but this is the ugly. And then sleep is also kind of a weird thing. People, well, first of all, people use use cannabis a lot to help sleep. But people who are adjusting how much cannabis they take sometimes report these incredibly vivid dreams, sometimes lucid dreams where you're kind of awake in control of your dream. And that could be magical, I guess. But also a lot of people report that it's just interrupting their sleep in a really awful way. Cannabis does impact the third and fourth stages of sleep in good and bad ways, respectively. Meaning people are sleeping more deeply when they're using cannabis reliably. We see that, but also sleeping in different stages less deeply. So the withdrawal of cannabis sort of flips that on its head. People end up having a less fulfilling fourth stage and a more fulfilling third stage. And depending on someone's baseline, either one of these can be helpful or harmful, or unpleasant, I would say. It's not really harmful. What are some of the solutions to hangovers? This is a really common question I get. I get a hangover with cannabis. What can I do about it? This is not really a tolerance thing. This is not really a dependence thing. It's just what else might be going on in addition to the cannabis. Cannabis itself is not usually going to cause acute effects. You're not going to feel something drastic change the next day if you're using cannabis, which is short-lived. If you have longer lasting cannabis, a longer duration, like an edible or a suppository, you might have a little bit of withdrawal effect at the end of that. You're to use my silly examples, your brain has become used to this product that's flowing through your veins. At the end of an 8-hour shift of cannabis use, your brain is like, wait a minute, that was good. What's happening here? This is not right. I want that old status quo. And you might get some aches and all the other symptoms I'd highlighted before. This slide is really about the solutions. Hydration is I think the most common cause, probably the top 3 most common causes. Just like with alcohol, if you drink alcohol, alcohol is a diuretic. It's pulling water out of your system. The solution to a hangover in alcohol is to drink more water, not just after the fact, but during the fact. For folks who are consuming cannabis and forgetting to drink water, guess what? You're probably going to have a hangover for the same reason. You're just dehydrated. And most of us, I think 80% of the population doesn't drink enough water anyway. So short and simple, hydrate more. This can also impact the dry eyes. Dry eyes is a little bit different because your tear ducts actually have cannabinoid receptor CB1 receptors. And that's a different mechanism, but the dryness, I guess, of eyes and mouth can be related to hydration. Headache, fog, all of the things I was just talking about, can be relating to hydration. Nutrition also is a relevant feature to think about for hangovers because sometimes people are just not eating a healthy diet, and whether it is protein density. So if your brain is pulling in protein receptors, and not able to replace them because you don't have adequate protein supplies in your body, you're going to have responses to cannabis accordingly. So it's important for anybody. I mean, obviously, in general, we want to eat healthfully. But if someone doesn't eat healthfully, you're going to have responses when you're changing very delicate neuroanatomy. Breakfast seems to be a special meal with respect to cannabis hangovers. When people eat a healthy, full breakfast, that seems to be better than if they're just eating in general, or eating, a lunch kind of person or a dinner kind of person. Taking a shower, Some of this might be hydration. I think the jury's, in my book, still out as far as how much hydration we get from showers. We have a pretty peculiar culture that we think we only get hydrated from our mouths. But on the other side, we actually exude a lot of water through our heat system and through our breath. My hunch is that there are other ways of hydrating besides drinking, that actually taking a shower can be hydrating. Just like when you take a bath, you get prune hands and prune feet. Your body is absorbing some level of water. The question of how systemic that gets is probably still up for grabs, but perhaps the shower is hydrating in this case, and that's why it's a solution. Heat in the shower also produces steam and helps us kind of open up the airways, and sometimes that airflow, depending on how someone's consuming cannabis, can make a difference. The heat also in a shower opens up pores, and there's something about the flow of our system. We have a chemical flow, we have a thermodynamic, a heat flow coming in and out of our system, and showers actually is a really neat way that sort of cleanses that, resets that, both of those systems, the thermal sort of adjustment to our environment, and also the chemical one. We all sweat and release trash, not just through our urine and feces, but also through our pores. And I think the shower is probably something involved in that sort of that stuff. It's a little bit hokey. I mean, the language I'm hearing myself is a little bit hokey, but it's because there's not much science. We really don't know these kinds of things, so it's all in the world of theory. Nobody studied this kind of stuff. Coffee actually does work as a hangover solution, and it's not just because it's like revving electric wires onto your system and helping you jazz up. Caffeine actually flushes cannabinoids. One of the studies that is really remarkable is people were given 8 times the normal dose of caffeine. I think it was like 4 full cups of coffee, maybe twice a day. And they found when they looked in their bloodstream that they had vastly lower levels of cannabinoids. So flushing out cannabis, sort of resetting the cannabinoid system, works. CBD works. It takes a little bit longer. Maybe it doesn't even belong on this list. It's sort of a long-term thing, but I've seen it work for hangover, so we threw it on here. Limonene and vitamin D actually are structural analogs. They look similar. Vitamin D and limonene are in everything that we eat, a lot of things that we eat, including the list you can read here. Vitamin C also works. It's also a limonene sort of analog. Vitamin D, there's actually a really secret, there's a secret dish that I love and recommend, and it's chopped up peppers, like red and green bell peppers or yellow peppers, with cracked peppercorn and lemon juice. And actually you can use clams too, diced clams or minced clams or whatever. Each of these components has really, really high volume of vitamin D. And this is a mixture which can really flush out one's endocannabinoid system. Anti-inflammatories work, depending on where the hangover is. Maybe it has nothing to do with the cannabis. It's just someone's stressed out and tense, and anti-inflammation would work. And then of course, sleep and water and exercise and just time are good for everything to reset. Okay, so this is the big list. It contains some of the things that were in the last slide that were really aimed toward hangover stuff, but this is really what can help someone who's feeling tolerance work on that tolerance. Everybody talks about T breaks, tolerance breaks. This is literally stopping cannabis use, waiting for those receptors to increase in density, to wait for the protein to sort of get into those receptors and have those receptors sprout. When people take tolerance breaks, it does work. Usually it takes some time, between 2 weeks, to a month. Even sometimes feel 12 hours of a break can make a difference. If we talk to patients about this, they often report, oh, the next morning or the first high in the morning is always the best because I've just slept. And sort of even that short amount of time can help receptors rebirth. But over time, certainly you have a much more high density. One of the things that we see, unfortunately, is that someone who is very tolerant, had a very high tolerance to cannabis and takes a break, the first dose of cannabis that they come back to will feel wonderful. We'll get them right where they want to be with very little product. But then they notice very quickly, they jump almost back to where they were before they took a break. And it's almost as if the receptors remember where they were hiding, or where they had receded, and they go back to that quickly. Not much is known about how this happens or why. It's probably adaptive. I've heard lots of different theories about how to do a tea break or what that means. There's a doctor out there I know well who recommends taking a complete break and then coming back slowly. So like the first time you came back, you take just a little bit of a puff of something, or whatever, small dose of something, and then when you even before you feel anything, you stop. And it's sort of like teasing the receptors to come out. There's not much, as far as I know, any science behind this, but maybe there's clinical effect. I've heard other approaches where people are saying, stop for a while, come back to it, and when you start to feel something, not even just a little puff that you wouldn't feel, but when you start to you take enough to feel just a little bit of something appealing, you stop. And that's, I guess, the similar phenomenon of teasing these receptors to come out. We like to humanize things we don't really understand. I don't know that there's any science to it. I think it's all going to be individual at the end of the day. Varying the schedule of use. So one of the things about tolerance that's sort of woven through what I've described, and hopefully you can see, is as you're consuming regularly, if every day at 8 o'clock you're consuming, almost no matter what you do at 8 o'clock every day, your body's going to sort of expect that, and the environment around the cannabis is going to be similar to what it was, and your circadian rhythm kind of adapts to that. I mean, that's what a circadian rhythm literally is. Varying your schedule of consumption is going to throw the predictability off, and that can help someone feel less tolerant. So if someone's using at nighttime, maybe sometimes they're doing a little bit earlier, a couple hours earlier, or a couple hours later. Varying the schedule of use. That's probably pretty clear. Reduced frequency, so using less often. What I've seen in the patients that come through Seed Clinic is as people use fewer than 3 or 4 days a week, so as opposed to every day a week, they tend to develop tolerance much more infrequently, or much less often. As opposed to people who are consuming every day, it's very common for them to get tolerant very quickly. So just consuming less often, whether that's taking a break or not, or just varying the schedule so that you're kind of taking less than everyday use, less than 4 days of use, that works. Varying the products, so the method of administration, whether you're eating it or breathing it or putting it on your skin or using a suppository or eye drops that we have these days, inhalers, yada yada, there's 1,000 different methods. These each respond differently. They're all differently bioavailable. Your body kind of treats them differently, engages with them a little bit differently. Those will also mix up the numbers of boxes that those triangles are seeing, and can be effective. Also, variability in the products. If you're taking the same cannabis from the same store in the same way, sometimes it's just the product that your brain is sick of. It's the certain ratio of THC, it's the certain components, other components in the terpenes and flavonoids that your brain gets bored with. So varying the type works. Also varying the amount. Most of the time when people recognize that they have a tolerance, they've taken more and more and more already because they don't want to deal with this. They just want to have a good effect. So varying the amount that you take. One day you take 5, one day you take 3, one day you take 7. That can make a big difference in sort of confusing your brain's receptors to having a consistently positive effect. And then varying all the other, or paying attention to all the other non-cannabis stuff. Make sure that you're sleeping. If you're not sleeping the same every day, try to get better sleep. Try to hydrate. Make sure that your baseline is all the way it should be. Sometimes varying your diet might mean you're going to get more of a nutrient that you might be deficient in. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Caffeine, as I was saying, flushes the cannabinoids away, and can help with developing tolerance. If your body is exuding less cannabis, because part of the cannabis that you consume is kind of stored in your body and released over time, even when you're not consuming. If you can flush some of that out with exercise, with caffeine, you're going to be the total amount of cannabinoids that these receptors sees will be smaller. hence less tolerance. The vitamin D flush and the vitamin C flush I mentioned earlier, same principle. Then basic nutrition, I sort of alluded to that already. Microdosing is something also that helps people with tolerance issues. This is essentially taking a tiny dose multiple times a day. Interestingly, we don't see people become tolerant of that. And I'm not sure why, but it works. Vaporizing digitally is sort of something very close to home because a lot of my research has been in this area. But cannabis, flower cannabis, I'm talking about vaporizing, not concentrates. Cannabis flower, well, not distillates. Whole plant concentrates are okay in my book as far as this stuff goes. But what I'm talking about here, vaporizing digitally, is digital flower vaporization, digital vaporization of flower. Flower is chock full of lots of different compounds, cannabinoids, major cannabinoids, minor cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids. It's like a whole pharmacy. And it's a whole pharmacy that you can dial into at different temperatures. If you have a vaporizer oven that controls digital temperature, as you're hitting 328, you're getting different product coming into your body than if you hit 412 degrees Fahrenheit. At each of these different temperatures, there are different compounds in cannabis which boil and come into your body and feel and interact with these receptors differently. As someone vaporizes with precision, they can start to not only learn what happens at different temperatures, but feel different effects and stave off tolerance because, again, you're not having the same thing all the time. This is sort of a fancier version of varying the amount, varying the dosage. CBD products. So CBD itself is actually a CB1 receptor agonist antagonist. It both accepts stimulation by these compounds. It both stimulates the receptor and blocks the receptor. It's a confusing molecule. That stimulation and antagonism does not stimulate the receptor to be withdrawn and desensitized and destroyed. So the presence of CBD by default kind of knocks THC out of the way and creates a pattern which is prone to less tolerance. Same with limonene. I've read, through part of this, I was reading what's online, and I've seen some theories about high potency products and the idea that if you take a product which is really, really high density in THC, you're going to kind of slap the heck out of these receptors. And then because it's so high potency, you don't need that much of it. And I guess the theory is that combination makes someone less prone to tolerance. I think that's ridiculous. I think it doesn't make any scientific sense to me, even in theory. And I've not seen that bear out in practice. When, this is sort of an example of vaporized distillates. When people are using cartridges, this is like taking a quintuple espresso. As soon as you get that, you're going to be, feeling great, I guess, or whatever you enjoy out of that much caffeine. But tomorrow you're going to need that same thing. And then the next day you're going to need that same thing. And then the following day, you probably need a 10-tuple caffeine. I think that's just a little bit silly to think that high potency is going to get you somewhere positive on the tolerance world. I think we have plenty of sort of anecdote that denies that or says contrary, but whatever, I saw it there. So I saw it out in the world. So I put it up here. So that's really all I had for this topic. Hopefully that was rich enough and dense enough, but not boring. These are, probably most of the people who are here know this, but if you don't, these are the ways that we try to educate the community and reach out. If you have questions or want to be engaged, any of these are great. And I will stop the share. And if people are still awake and want to have questions, I'm happy to field questions or translate or slow down all the stuff I was zipping through. In case you guys do have questions and don't want to be typing, I'm just going to allow everybody to talk, and we'll see if you don't have to, but if you want to, you can. Oh, maybe I'm only allowed to do that to some people. And looks like Rachel's using an older form of Zoom, so you're not even allowed to, you can't even talk if you wanted to.
I don't have any questions, but I do thank you because I found it very interesting.
Awesome. Thanks, Leslie. I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming often. I feel like we're at least a team now.
Okay, and I'll be there tomorrow night too.
Looking forward to it. Oh, we have a dispensary, right, tomorrow? Or what's tomorrow?
Correct, the dispensary.
Awesome. Yes, there's so many this week. It's like hard to keep track of.
Right.
All right. Well, we don't have to keep you longer. Thank you guys for joining. And for those of us who are watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. We have tons of other topics if you haven't seen them. And we're open to totally new topics. This was actually a topic that one of my patients suggested. And if you have others, happy to do others. Just let us know at questions@cedclinic.com. All right, thanks everybody.
I do actually have a question.
Oh, great.
Could you repeat it's bit.ly
Yes,
/CED tolerance?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, have a good night, Leslie.